Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the significance of Oxford's COVID-19 vaccine trials taking place in India. We will also take a look at a case where internationally coordinated efforts saved a man from the brink of suicide. But first, we talk about the India-China standoff. The border tensions between the two countries is now in its fourth month. As we have mentioned before, the Chinese have ingressed along at least 4 points on the LAC in eastern Ladakh: Pangong Tso, the Galwan Valley area, Hot Springs, and Debsang. In the past 10 days, there have been talks between the two sides on two of these areas, Pangong Tso and Depsang. Last week, there was also what appeared to be the government's first admission that the Chinese have transgressed. In this segment, Indian Express's deputy editor Sushant Singh joins us to talk about the highlights of these talks and why the government is silent on the issue. Sushant, since we last spoke, there have been more rounds of talks between the two sides, and the main point of discussions have been Pangong Tso and Depsang. Could you talk about Pangong Tso first? We had the fifth round of talks between the core commanders, and Pangong Tso has been one of the major points of friction between the two sides, and the Chinese have been reluctant to disengage there. So, what has been the result of the talks now?
So the fifth round of talks at the level of the core commander were held around 10 days ago. And the talks, as always, lasted some 10, 11 hours. And they were focused mainly on Pangong Tso. But eventually, there was no resolution that could be found which was mutually acceptable to the two sides. So as we have discussed often, the Chinese have come in 8 kilometers onto the Indian side of the LAC. And the Indians would want them to go back to where they were earlier. They have also undertaken some construction, and they're also stopping Indian patrols from going and accessing the points that they were accessing earlier. So these are the three things which are required, which the Indians want. The first thing, stepping back and going back to where they were earlier, 8 kilometers behind. In that, the first step was taken where both the sides moved back by around 1.5 to 2 kilometers. That was after the fourth round of talks between the core commanders. And that was essentially that because Indians had also stepped forward from their post, they went back to their post, whereas the Chinese went back by 1.5 kilometers. Now, during this round of talks, the Chinese said that any further stepping back by the Chinese has to be mutually and equally met by the Indians. And they said, this is the principle we have followed so far, whether it is PP14, PP15, and whether it is Pangong Tso so far. So we should essentially, even now, if you want us to step back by another 6 kilometers, you also step back by 6 kilometers. Now that's, preposterous. Because if Indians are already at their dancing post where they have been there for so many years, so many decades, so it's crazy to expect that Indians will vacate their post and go back. So it was clearly a ploy devised to ensure that the talks break down. Of course, the Indians found the proposal unacceptable, and they have informed the Chinese that the proposal is not acceptable to the Indian side, and they would not be vacating, they would not be stepping back. And the onus for restoring the status quo ante on Pangong Tso lies on the Chinese. The Chinese stance was actually made clear by the Chinese ambassador to India a few days ago when he spoke at the Institute of China Studies. There he said that the LAC passed through where the Chinese were currently deployed, and there was no question of negotiating over that LAC. And I think that is the stance that the Chinese took in the last meeting of the core commanders. And that clearly seems to have stalled the talks, where the Indians have told the Chinese that no progress is possible on Pangong Tso.
The other point where the Chinese have transgressed is the Debsang Plains. This is a disputed side and a place where both sides have amassed troops. It is also a place that is considered strategically important. Could you talk about the situation there and also why it is considered particularly a strategic area?
Yeah, so Debsang, as we have discussed earlier, Debsang is a very strategically important area because it is very close to the strategic DSDBO highway, DSDBO road, which connects northern Ladakh to southern Ladakh. It's also an important area because it provides access to the Karakoram region as well as to the DBO airstrip. DBO airstrip is at the base of the Karakoram Pass. And of course, this area is equally important for China because the major link between the two restricted provinces of Tibet and Xinjiang, they are connected by the Western Highway. And the further they push India inside Debsang, the greater the depth they would have on the Western Highway. So this is a very strategically important area. And the Indian and Chinese major generals actually met on Saturday and discussed the situation in Debsang, how they could undertake some de escalation because both sides have amassed a vast number of troops on the LAC. And also, the Indians wanted the Chinese to stop blocking their patrols, which they have been doing at a place called Bottleneck, 18 kilometers inside the LAC. And as we have discussed earlier, these are the five patrolling points: PP10 on the Rakinala, PP11, PP11A, PP12, and PP13 on the Jivan Nala that has been blocked by the Chinese. And Indians want the patrols to be allowed to access these patrolling points as were being done earlier. So these talks have taken place on Saturday. The Indian and Chinese major generals, they have discussed ways as to how they can de-escalate and reduce the tensions on that strategic area, as well as restore the patrolling rights for the Indians. The outcome of the talks is not very clear yet. We'll have to probably wait and watch and see as to how it is playing out.
Sushant, one thing that we have even previously discussed is the government's silence and a bit of denial of the situation. Despite there being evidence, the government has not admitted to transgressions that have taken place. But last week, we had this document that was uploaded on the Defense Ministry's website, and that clearly stated that China had transgressed into the Indian territory in eastern Ladakh. And this was India's first admission, on this subject. The document also warned of a prolonged standoff, but then, the document disappeared from the website. So what do we, assess the reason for this silence, for not openly admitting to the situation?
Primarily, the strategic reason which the supporters of the government believe is that the political leadership does not want to come under pressure and it wants to have the space to maneuver and negotiate with the Chinese without public pressure on them to throw the Chinese out. So they want that strategic space available to them, both in terms of time and in terms of geography, where they are not under pressure to immediately precipitate some action which could lead to even bigger challenges. But to my mind, it seems that the government is equally keen that the Indian public or the Indian masses do not talk about the fact that the Chinese soldiers continue to remain on the Indian side of the LAC in eastern Ladakh. And as was evident from the way and the manner in which that document was removed from the website without any explanation, that the government is clearly not keen on admitting that the Chinese are on the Indian side, and this is going to be a prolonged standoff as the Chinese side is not giving in much ground during the negotiations. I understand the reasons why the government of India would want to not come under pressure, why it would want some space to maneuver and to negotiate. But this complete blockage of information is not healthy in a democracy. The information should be shared up to a point, up to a limit, so that the public is broadly aware of what is going on. It should not be dependent on foreign press or satellite imagery from private satellite companies to come to know where the Chinese are sitting and where they're not sitting. That is even doubly embarrassing for the government when it is done by foreign media or by satellite images than by government acknowledging the truth itself.
And have previous Indian governments found themselves in similar situations in the past? And also, how much do these statements that the government makes actually affect things on the negotiating table?
The second question first, the statements by the government do affect their position on the negotiating table because that is something, once you have said something publicly, it is very hard to go back from that position without losing face, especially losing face with the public. As we are seeing with the current Indian government, with the BJP government, the fact that it has always, harped on its nationalistic credentials, very strong national security credentials, the Chinese ingress, the Chinese transgressions make it very difficult for it to save face without saying that we would throw the Chinese out. The fact that 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives, the fact that 78 Indian soldiers were injured, and the fact that 10 Indian soldiers were taken captive during the clash by itself suggests that the situation is pretty serious. But without the government really going out and acknowledging the gravity of the situation. As far as whether there were incidents earlier, yes, of course, there are incidents all the year round, whether on China border or other places. But the incidents of this nature, when you have multiple sites of ingress, when you have multiple sites where transgressions have taken place, where you have such a large number of troops facing each other, it is very tough to keep this level of mobilization and this level of tension under wraps. You can't really brush this under the carpet as much as you would want to. And that's what we have seen over the period of last 3 months or 4 months, that the situation has continued to remain in the public limelight despite the lack of information and silence from the government.
Dear listeners, sorry for this interruption, but before we move on to the rest of the show, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on Three Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about Oxford's COVID-19 vaccine candidate. The Oxford candidate is considered one of the global frontrunners of the COVID-19 vaccine. Currently, it is in the process of conducting phase 2 and 3 of human trials. At these stages, first hundreds and then thousands of volunteers are enrolled and given a shot of the vaccine candidate. And then they are tracked to see whether the desired immune response has been triggered and then whether the immune response can actually fight the virus. Last month, Oxford had announced that their candidate had in fact triggered an immune response in humans against the novel coronavirus. For the vaccine, Oxford has partnered with the pharma major AstraZeneca to produce it globally. Now, early last week, news broke out that the Serum Institute of India, which is the world's largest maker of vaccines, received approval to conduct the late-stage human trials for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine candidate. The approval was given by India's top drug regulator, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, or CDSCO. In this segment, we talk to Prabha Raghavan, who reports on pharma and health for the Indian Express, about the significance of Oxford's human trials being conducted in India. And she first explains why the trials are happening in India in the first place.
So the approval that Serum Institute of India has received to conduct the Oxford trials in India is not just for a phase 3 trial, but for a phase 2 and 3 trial. So this is a mid to late stage clinical trial that we're going to see happening on over 1,500 participants in India. And the reason that it is important to have India's representation in the trials is because India has such a huge population. And the reason that trials are conducted in different countries, especially late stage trials, is because you don't really know how this particular drug or vaccine that is being tested is going to react in different demographics. And that is the reason that researchers have often highlighted the need to have adequate representation of racially and ethnically diverse sets of subjects in clinical trials so that we get that clarity on how they react to a medical product.
The other reason Prabha says this is important is because the Indian regulator will not approve the use of the vaccine in the country if local trials have not been conducted here. Now, one question that has been on the minds of people is that does this mean that India would get the vaccine sooner? Prabha says that on a certain level, that might be true. Because once a vaccine is ready to use, the company then has to go to different countries and get their regulatory approvals.
So the fact that one of the leg of the trials is being conducted in India definitely gives India an edge in the sense that we may see approvals sooner than other countries. But after this approval comes, whether all of India is going to get access to the vaccine sooner is probably not a very good assumption to make. And the government has been discussing how they want to start giving out the vaccine, and not just the Oxford vaccine, but any COVID vaccine that comes to market soon. And they're going to prioritize people who are in the healthcare workforce, the frontline workers, people who are vulnerable in this situation, so people who are in a situation where they can get exposed to the virus easier than others, and then the vulnerable population, which would be the elderly, people with comorbidities, and then after that, healthy people.
The other thing to note is that the Serum Institute also has a tie-up with AstraZeneca to manufacture this vaccine for several other low and middle income countries, not just India.
So half of whatever Serum produces will end up going to these countries as well. And given the fact that right now, Serum is still in the process of scaling up its manufacturing capacity so that it can actually produce the number of doses that are required, it's not possible to say that all of India will get the vaccine sooner. But yes, India will definitely be one of the priority countries for Serum and for the Oxford vaccine in general.
The other question is how much the vaccine will end up costing and whether it will be affordable to Indians. Prabha says that we don't have a clear answer to that question yet. But here's what we do know. One is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has agreed to fund 100 million vaccine doses that will be produced by Serum, and 50% of these doses, that is 50 million, will be provided to India at $3 a dose.
But we also know that Serum has a separate agreement with AstraZeneca. And according to that agreement, yes, 50% of whatever Serum produces will also come to India. But we don't really know what price they're setting for that. And the only indicator that we have is something that Serum's CEO had said over the last few months, which is they're going to try to make it affordable and they're going to try to make sure that it is priced at less than 1,000 rupees.
So 50 million doses at $3, which is around 250 rupees, thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and 50% of what Serum produces will be provided to India thanks to its tie-up with AstraZeneca, which will be under 1,000 rupees a dose.
So 250 rupees for a dose versus we don't really know how much less than 1,000 rupees a dose. We don't know what that cost is going to be. And we don't know how exactly it's going to be introduced into the market. It is likely that it is going to be introduced by way of a government tie-up. But until that tie-up happens, until the government says, okay, we are purchasing X number of doses from Serum at so-and-so cost, we don't really know what the value of that vaccine is going to be for India.
Now that the human trials have been approved, 17 facilities across the countries have been chosen as places where these trials will be conducted. These sites will first have to get approvals from an ethics committee, and once they do that, they can start advertising for people to come and volunteer for these trials.
Anyone who's interested will register themselves, will reach out to the site, and they will say, we want to participate. And these will be healthy volunteers. Then what happens is they will go through this entire process of informed consent where they'll be called in and on camera, they will be explained what the procedure of this trial is, what the risks are, what the advantages are, and what sort of instructions they're going to have to follow while they're going through this trial. And once they say, okay, we agree to all these terms, they will be tested by the sites to make sure that they were not already exposed to the virus. So as long as they're none of these kinds of people and are people who just have never been exposed to the virus, they can then be enrolled for the trial and will then be injected with the vaccine and then observed over the coming month, where at the end of the month, I think on the 28th day or so, they're going to get a second dose of the vaccine. And then they will be observed again to see how well their body responds to the vaccine, whether they develop immunity to the virus, whether they develop antibodies, whether there is a T cell response, which basically means that whether their body develops these white blood cells that can actually target the virus long after the antibodies are gone. That's basically what we're expecting to see going forward now.
There are many who have been saying that if all goes well, the vaccine will be ready by the end of this year. But Prabha says that she takes that with a grain of salt.
Because the deadline or the timeline for this vaccine getting ready has changed so many times that I think it just wouldn't make sense for us to put an exact date or a month for us to predict when exactly it's going to be ready. If we go by what the Bill and Melinda Gates agreement with Serum and Gavi said, the idea, I guess, is that the vaccine should hopefully be ready and be produced to be distributed by the first half of next year.
And in the end, we talk about how an internationally coordinated effort involving the Mumbai and the Delhi police brought a 25-year-old man back from the brink of suicide. A story of how quick thinking and compassion saved a man's life. The entire matter started on Saturday evening, when the man in question started putting up Facebook Live videos of himself wanting to attempt suicide. Somya Lakhani, who reported on the story, tells us what followed.
So on August 8th, late evening, this was Saturday around 8 at night, DCP Cyber Cell in Delhi, Anish Roy, got a call from the Facebook headquarters in Ireland. And the official told him that, we've seen some suspicious suicidal activity on a Facebook account, which we have managed to track down to Delhi. So DCP Cyber Cell received a bunch of emails from the Facebook headquarters, which had the IP logs, which had the videos, and which also had the phone number which was used to register this particular account.
In a case like this, when a person is suicidal, you don't have a lot of time. Roy, the DCP Cyber Crime in Delhi, knew that he had to act fast. The first step was to trace the location of the phone, which they tracked down to an area in East Delhi. Roy then contacted DCP East Jasmeet Singh, told him about the situation, and emphasized that they needed to avert the suicide.
So DCP Jasmeet immediately deployed his station house officer. They managed to find the address. They reach and they realize that the man who was putting up the videos is not living there. His wife is. And then the wife tells the police officers that, 2 weeks ago, my husband had fought with me and he left for Mumbai. And I don't know where he is. I don't know where he lives. I don't know where he works. I just have his phone number. And my phone number has been used to register the Facebook account that he uses.
The information was then relayed back to Roy, who had first got the call from Facebook's office in Ireland. He then got in touch with DCP Cyber Crime in Mumbai, Dr. Rashmi Karandikar, who formed two teams. One was in charge of tracking the phone number that the wife had shared of her husband in Mumbai, and two involved Inspector Copickers, who was part of a unit and was asked to keep calling the man.
Now, what happened was that they couldn't get through this person. His phone was either switched off or he wasn't taking any calls. So Inspector Copickers called up his wife, the woman who we've met in Delhi, and asks her what happened. And she tells him that, he's been troubled, we've been fighting, I haven't been able to talk to him for a few days now. So Copickers suggests that, listen, as much as I understand, I think your husband is very upset. Why don't you send him some emotional voice notes? Send him a photo of your child if you have one. And as soon as he reads your message on WhatsApp and you get a blue tick, you call me. So we know that, he's fine and we'll immediately try and call him just on the mobile phone.
At around 11:30 at night, nearly 3.5 hours after the first call from Ireland, his wife calls up Inspector Copickers and tells him that the messages she'd sent her husband on WhatsApp now had blue ticks. Copickers now calls up the man and puts him on a conference call with his wife,
in which this man is crying. And for about an hour, the two of them are arguing and Copickers is listening to that. And what he does is he manages to find the address of the man and the number and realizes that now this is not even in Bombay, this is on the outskirts of Mumbai, which is Bhayandar, which does not come under his jurisdiction. So he gets in touch with the local police there and tells them that I'm going to keep him engaged on the phone. You reach out to him.
In the middle of all this, Copickers realizes that their efforts in trying to get through to the man aren't being successful. He's still crying and still has suicide on his mind. So he then asks his own wife to talk to the man.
So now on a conference call at 2 a.m, you have the man who wants to commit suicide, his wife, Inspector Copickers of Mumbai Police, and Inspector Copickers' wife. four of them. And Kopicker's wife is trying to convince this man and says that, my husband and I fight so often, but at the end of the day, we're still okay. This man has many, many anxieties. He's scared about getting COVID, to which Kopicker's wife again says that you don't have to worry. See, my husband got COVID, but he's completely fine. He's happy, he's home, he's healthy. So will you be in case you get it. So, she's trying to calm down his fears. And then he says that, how during the COVID lockdown, because of the virus, he lost a lot of money. He didn't make enough salary and he was very worried. He was under deep financial stress, to which Kopicker very kindly offered and said that, I have an Ola, I have a vehicle that is attached to Ola, and, I'll help you out. If you want to drive that, you want to take up a second job, I'll help you out. And finally, while they're on the call with him and trying to sort of calm him down and trying to help him out, the same time the Bhayandar police reaches his house and reassures him that he's going to be fine. And the call eventually ended about 3 in the morning. And then the next day, which was Sunday, the police, has been in touch with the man since then. They are trying to call him, check up on him to, make sure he's fine. And this is how the whole Ireland to Delhi to Bombay to Bhayandar story happened.
While reporting on the story, Somya says that what stood out to her about the whole thing was just how quickly all of it happened.
The call only came at about 7:51 in the evening. And by 11:30, this man has been traced. They're on a call with him about 11:30 at night, while you only have one phone number with you and nothing else, no other way of tracing a person. So one was that. Two, obviously, the entire chain of events. Had even one person in the chain decided that this is something that can be delayed or this is something that maybe isn't that serious, then it won't have worked out. You needed from the call from Ireland to DCP Crime in Delhi to DCP East Delhi to, DCP Cyber Crime in Bombay to Inspector Copicker to Bhayandar Police. Each person understood the seriousness of the situation and did their best to make sure that they can save him somehow.
The other thing she says was Inspector Copicker's kindness and quick thinking.
Where he realized at some point of time in the middle of the conversation that maybe whatever he's saying is not as effective, which is why he decided that maybe my wife needs to be involved in this conversation. Maybe my wife can explain to him that don't do this. Maybe she can dissuade him. The fact that, you've decided that I will not hang up on this person. I will not cut the call on this person till I am assured that he's fine. These few things, and I know that a lot of people say that this is the job of the police, which it is. I stand by that. I understand this is the job of the police when they've been informed about this. But I also think that what needs to be appreciated are these moments of kindness, these spurts of kindness that you see in individual officers.
One thing that Dr. Rashmi pointed out to Somya later was that these efforts worked in the short term, but something needed to be done keeping the long term in mind.
How do you ensure that government agencies, families, friends, how are they involved in making sure that a person who's undergoing this kind of psychological stress is given help? So one of the points that she made was that, while these Facebook Live videos were being made, was any effort made by the friends who maybe saw the videos to, reach out to him? Or how do you tackle this by getting him help? So these were the larger questions, because this was one case. This is one person. His life is very precious, of course, but this is one case. How do you address the larger issue around it? I think that is the conversation that the story should start.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.